Good evening, everyone. How are you? Before I start my part for this, I'd like to do something that is very important and very respectful in Indigenous culture. I'll read it out for you. I acknowledge the traditional owners of this land where we meet today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. So what I just read out for you is called an acknowledgement of country. And why that is so important to us as Indigenous Australians is that it's a sign of respect for our people of past and present. Now, there are actually two different types. There's an acknowledgement of country, which I've just provided you and that you can see, but there's also a welcome to country. You may have heard that before big sporting events or performing arts events. They're becoming quite common here in Melbourne. To explain that to you, if you see here traditional owners of the Wurundjeri people, I'm not Wurundjeri. I'm not from this is not my traditional lands. My traditional lands are in New South Wales. So I can provide an acknowledgement to country. Non-Indigenous Australians as well, you can provide the same thing, an acknowledgement. And by doing that, you're showing respect to the elders on the land in which this meeting, this conference, the series is being held. So we all know this as Parkville today. Yep, that's true and correct. But this area is also called Naarm. So that was the original traditional name of Melbourne. And this is the land of the Wurundjeri people. So they looked after this land and they had many activities, teachings and a whole range of things which I'll talk to you about in a sec. I should actually tell you a little bit about myself before I go on. So my role is to support the Indigenous Australian community by ensuring that the University of Melbourne offers as many jobs as possible on a whole different range of levels. So I support my community by advertising jobs, by recruiting community members through employment programs, by providing support, advice to their managers, a whole range of things, so that the university does their part in making a contribution to the Indigenous community, so that the university can show that they're making sincere and progressive efforts to close that gap, to ensure that Indigenous Australian people have as much opportunities as everyone else. So my role is pivotal to the university's success, but also I feel quite privileged to help community from all over Australia find their place here in a career, at Australia's #1 university. So for me, it's a real privilege to do what I do. And my background, you're probably looking at me and probably thinking to yourself, he doesn't look Indigenous. And I've got that a few times. I'm of mixed heritage, and but I have been told, well, you look a little bit Arabic, or you look Islander, Pacific Islander, South Sea Islander, a whole range of things, and that's because of my mixed heritage, and here we are. That's the result. But my father's side is Aboriginal. But not only that, there is also Scottish and Chinese heritage in there as well. On my mother's side, they're all from Sicily. Mum was born in Australia, parents migrated in the late 50s, like many did across the Mediterranean. So I have mixed heritage, and I identify myself as Australian born, but Indigenous Australian and Sicilian heritage. So that's how I see myself as a person, that I have very special mixed heritage, and I identify myself more with those two, more so than the others that are in there because of my upbringing. And so that's who I am. And I think when people understand that, then they get to realise, well, maybe next time I won't judge a person based on what they look like, because I've seen what Indigenous people look like in tourism industry or on TV or a singer. But that's not the truth. Because Indigenous Australians, there are many of us with mixed heritage, you'll get all sorts of different looks, facial features, things like that. So that's who I am today. And I feel it's a special part for me to connect with my Indigenous side, because I wasn't brought up in my community and brought up on Aboriginal customs, dances, food, spiritual things. I was brought up in a non-Indigenous family, mostly on my Italian side, so I know a lot about my Italian history and culture. So for me, this is very important because it helps me to reconnect as a person and use the opportunity I have now to offer you information, to inform you about my culture. But I'm not the expert, and nor is any Indigenous Australian person you meet today. We are not all the experts of our culture, and you'll find out why in a sec. But it's very, very important to understand. I think just like anyone that we meet, you don't assume that they're an expert in their culture unless they have a status in their community. So before we go on to here, can I get a raise of hands? How many people would say they know a little bit about Indigenous culture, art, dance? Can they tell me who an actor, singer or anyone is? Would raise their hands anyone they feel they know a little bit about my culture? No? Yep, thank you. And so that's some of the challenges that we have as Indigenous Australian people, is that our culture is not actively promoted as much as we would like. Tourism industry, if you're from overseas, you see Australia, you probably see a man playing the didgeridoo, the outback, Uluru, the desert. There is so much more to our culture than that. What you see in tourism, what you see on TV, that's just a little bit. That's to get people excited that they'll pitch a tent in the desert and have the real Australian experience. But what is this map showing you? That Indigenous Australia is just in the desert in the middle? It is all over the nation, isn't it? And I brought this up because this is not common knowledge for many of us today. Australia's educational curriculum is getting better and better every year. And what I mean by that is that there is more information that young children, young kids, are learning about Indigenous Australian culture. When I was in high school, it was very, very short. It was that there were Aboriginal people here, and then straight away it would move to Captain Cook, the First Fleet. So when I was in high school, my own culture was dismissed. Wasn't a lot of information. But for now, a lot of kids, a lot of students are learning more, which is fantastic to hear. So as a nation, Australia is on its way. We are progressing, and there is a lot to do. And when you have a look at this, these are nations. These are groups, different groups and nations. So I said to you before that on my Indigenous side. Now, can you see that beige blob? Does anyone have a long stick? No? That's all right. There's the big beige one up there. That's called Wiradjuri. And there's another one there on the side that's called Yuin. So as Indigenous Australian people, when we talk to other Indigenous Australian people, I say to them, "Hi, I'm Dad. I'm a Wiradjuri man from New South Wales." That's how we identify. And they'll say, "Oh, hi, I'm so-and-so from say from Wadawurrung country. And so we identify ourselves by our name and our traditional lands. Yes, yes.
You say you identify as a language and everything. So there's a many groups there. Do they speak everyone speak the same language or the different ones?
Different ones.
So how did you guys connect it? Like how did you make a conversation with other groups?
There were definitely, I think back then because of our history and many of our languages were lost, that I think back then there were definitely certain dialects. So you have your main language in a nation, but then within that nation you'd have smaller dialect groups so you can talk. So there was definitely some crossover with language. So when one would articulate themselves, they would be able to pick it up in a certain way. But because that was back then and this is now, it's very hard to explain that because many of our languages are lost, which I'll get to in a sec. So when you have a look at this map, you're looking at over 400 different languages and over 250, you can say, tribes or nations. So that's how diverse Indigenous Australia was and still is. We still use this map today. This is not history just because we have states and territories in Australia. This is living proof that Australia, prior to colonisation, was a very advanced, complex nation. Had defined boundaries. There were laws, which I'll get onto shortly. But this, this is the real Australia as we know it, the Indigenous Australia. And so, with such a complex nation that has survived for thousands and thousands of years, and when you have a look at your research onto Indigenous Australia, they say that we are the oldest continuing culture in the world. When you look right back in history, it talks about our people as such that. And so for those many thousands of years, despite the many changes in climate and geography, as a nation, as a complex civilised nation, you would need to abide by a certain thing, a law. And so we did have that. So in comparison to the English term LAW, law, meaning a rule or collection of rules, Aboriginal law underpinned all aspects of society, right from your education to what foods you could eat and when you deal with other nations. So not all nations were friends. Some were friends, some were enemies, and some were neutral, I guess. And so there were laws on how to interact and do it in the right way. And there were consequences. You will be in trouble if you do things the wrong way. Or if you go to a certain area which is very sacred and only for women to go, if you went as a man, you would be in big trouble and be punished for that. Same thing with women as well. Obligations. And so this is how our people, our civilization, which you could see by that map is very, very diverse, has survived for thousands and thousands of years. And so that artwork that you could see there, that's what depicts a corroboree, a dance. And so, hands up anyone, has anyone ever seen Aboriginal language, written language? No, because there isn't any. No written language, no. So how did we teach our people to pass on that information for thousands and thousands of years? There were certain ways, wasn't it? And when you think about Aboriginal culture, you think about artwork. You know, you've probably seen dot paintings, but dot paintings is not traditional to Victoria. That is very central in the desert to Arnhem Land. There's a particular type of painting here for Melbourne. You think of storytelling, you know, stories and teachings. You think of songs. And, you know, you think of dances as well. Because if you as a young person, you'll remember a song, won't you? If you hear it all the time, you'll remember a dance. You'll see art, so we were, visually, that's how our people best learn, by visually and also by listening. And so that's where knowledge took place, transmission from one generation to the next. And so your obligation, as it says there, as a man, woman or young person in community, you could be a teacher, or you could be a healer, or your role could be a hunter, and you would need to take your men to go and hunt at a certain time of the day, or your role as an older woman is to teach younger women about their role in whatever that may be in the community. So everyone had a defined role to play, and we lasted for thousands and thousands of years. So as a nation, that law, we must have been doing something right because we lived for so long. But then came a sudden change in Australian history. And note that this was only 229 years ago that this occurred. And so for a peaceful people abiding by law for thousands of years, that did have interactions with Europeans, with other people from other nations, but that was mostly through bartering. But in 1770, Captain Cook arrived, and then 1788, the first fleet arrived. And so what that marked for our people was a complete change in the way of life across all of Australia, because that's all our people knew is law. You abide by law, you'll survive and thrive. You don't abide by law, you get punished. But now our people were to face a new world, a world in which was to have implications for us as a people. And you may have heard the word settled. You may have heard when you think of what happened to Australia back 229 years ago, it wasn't a peaceful settlement. It wasn't, there was no treaty, there was no agreement between the older men of the tribes and clans and those on the first fleet. There was a certain agenda, and of course, it was invasion. Invasion quickly spread from Sydney, and from that point on, that's all our people ever knew and were faced with for many, many years, is the impact of invasion. And I won't go into that, but it's important to acknowledge that that is what our ancestors experienced 229 years ago, and the impacts of that do actually affect certain things today that our people are faced with. And so there is always a reason behind certain issues and challenges that the Indigenous Australian community face today, and all stems from this particular time in Australia's dark history. And so what did that mean for our people? It meant quite a significant impact for us. And so when you have a look through that list, you can see that there were many layers of change in which our people encountered. There was a significant transition from a certain way of life, a spiritual people, so a connection to the land was very, very spiritual and was physical. So we would only go out and take what was needed. We wouldn't take more than what was needed because we had a relationship with the land like Mother Earth. You protected and looked after it, and Mother Earth would protect and look after you. So it was a very spiritual connection. But what's happened is that land management practice was lost. So when I say to you I'm a Wiradjuri and Yuin man, they are the people I identify with. There was a certain time where people didn't know where they were from because they were taken off that land. Health as well. So our diet was quite strict, but now, of course, our diet was introduced to introduced foods, to sugars and bread and things that our people have never encountered before. And so that has impact on our health as Indigenous Australian people today. Some more so than others, but it's only been 229 years, and so it's not a long time for significant to change to happen. Diets definitely do remain quite the same. And you can see there also that loss of culture and connection, like I was saying, to land. There was a government movement and process in which Indigenous Australian people from a certain community, they were driven off their lands because that land was used to set up a station, a cattle station, whatever that may be. So you were physically taken off your land, and that affected your identity as a man, woman or young person. Our people were also forced into survival mode. So there are many accounts where our people were put into camps in chains and treated like someone's possession. So we were very much viewed back then as inferior, as lesser, as non-civilised. We were seen as equivalent to the animals that they saw back then, because even though there was a period of time, 1770 to 1788, that's 18 years, where those on the Endeavour could have seen that they saw how we lived, they still saw us as inferior. But you've just learned for yourself, our civilisation was very complex, very sophisticated. You had your role to play, and that was it. And everyone's made their contribution to a community, and that's how the community survived and thrived and evolved as well. But that wasn't thinking pattern back then. There was an agenda to take over Australia and, of course, establish an extension of the British Empire. And so the way that it was done resulted into this. The way that it was carried out. And I'm talking to you about massacres. I'm talking about mass killings of our people in secrecy. A lot of them are recorded, but a lot of them aren't as well.
Can you explain the terms that it just used it, please?
Yep.
Terms that it just used it now.
Yep, massacre.
Yeah.
So massacre is like a big killing of a big group. Yeah. And so that there is a lot of history with our people on that, and so if that didn't occur, then you were forced onto a reserve or a mission. So run by a church group or a state manager. So if you were taken away from your community, put into a mission, and you were told, you're not allowed to speak your language, no more. You're not allowed to do art, no more. No more dancing, no more singing. You learn to speak English. You read the Bible. Many of our people had to do that. And so that's what I mean by layers. Taken off your land, one layer. You cannot speak your language anymore, another layer. You can't dance or sing or celebrate your culture, another layer. You're taken away from your family, disconnected from your family, another layer. So this is the progressive state of what occurred to our people back then. And for many today, many are still struggling with the effects of what happened to our people back then. And I won't go into it too much, but it's important to acknowledge that because of the past policies and government assimilation, so when I mean by assimilation, you now lead this new lifestyle and forget your identity, who you were before. That has resulted into some of these issues that we see across Australia today with many Indigenous communities. High suicide rates. We have one of the highest suicide rates of youth in the whole world. Health outcomes, like I mentioned before, self-identity, connection to land and community. Many young ones know, yes, I'm Aboriginal, but I don't know anything about it. So not brought up on their culture because their parents were forced not to, or they were told to forget. So many circumstances and situations where many do not know who they are inside, who they are as a person. And so this is the impact that we see today and has been for many years. And I'm not saying that all Indigenous Australian people have the same, not at all. For some, there will be certain things that they deal with on a day-to-day basis, and for others, not really. There are many in our community that are prosperous, that have done very well for themselves, that have worked against the odds and made sure that they tackle these things head on and ensure that it doesn't affect them or their children. So I don't want you to think, just because of what I said, that to feel pity for Indigenous Australian people, or to think that you can only look at us through a negative or a weak lens. That's not the case. What I've explained to you just now is for you to now have the background context, the cause, I'm saying, to the effect that you are looking at here on the board. To explain what's happened in the past makes you now realise, now I understand when I hear about poor health outcomes for Aboriginal people. Now I understand why the government puts so much money into Aboriginal health. And so this just gives you an idea of some of the many challenges that we face as people. But nonetheless, many are working towards having healthy lifestyle to improve their outcomes in life. Here at the University of Melbourne, we have so many students that are coming straight from high school and are starting an undergraduate degree. The students here are heavily supported and the numbers keep growing each year. And so we're doing quite well in Year 12 attainment and transferring into undergraduate disciplines. So I don't want you to think it's all doom and gloom, but just to acknowledge that it's because of the past history of this country that has impacted our people that we as a people struggle today. And we struggle to get recognition for this as well. So many people judge us because of what they see in 1, the media, 2, their education, and 3, their social circles. Those 3 things mould you and influence you as a man, woman or child, regardless if you believe that or not. And for us as Indigenous Australians, there is a lot to blame for those things, because when was the last time you saw a positive outcome on what an Indigenous man, woman or child has done for the country, what they've achieved? When was the last time you heard or saw that? When was the last time you saw our culture widely celebrated or in your face whenever you turn on the TV? And so we're challenged as a people to inform and educate others that there are so many success stories, there is so much talent, there is so much empowerment with young people today, that despite what we face, that we are a proud and strong people, and that we acknowledge our history, we respect our elders, and we want to improve the outcomes for our people. And that's what we're very passionate about. I haven't met one Aboriginal person that doesn't want to make an impact on the lives of their community today. And so here's an example of celebrating our culture, and we celebrate it with pride. The one at the top, of course, you've got young children there performing a dance, and so that is very powerful for them, and a great celebration for all the community. The artwork down there, that is actually artwork from where I work at Murrup, Barak. That artwork there has a story. That's a particular story. And you know how I said that Victoria has their own certain artwork? It's this one down here. So you've got the dot painting in the middle that everyone knows about, but this is the artwork from Victoria. The lines and the swirls, that's the artwork here on the lands that you're on. You see there a march that we do. So we march through the city once a year as a way to celebrate and put our voice forward about the conditions that our people still face. Overrepresented in the prison, for example. And of course, our pride as well, in terms of our culture. So, you know the Aboriginal flag, the black, yellow and red, but don't forget the Torres Strait Islander flag. So Torres Strait is between Papua New Guinea and Cape York. And so They are still indigenous to their land, they are still traditional owners, First Peoples, but they are not on the mainland of Australia, and of course they're named Torres Strait Islander people. And so today we have many from our community that are rappers, models, actors, they're in business, in politics, in government, in education, in a whole range of different sectors. Our people are very much engaged, and the majority of our people are engaged in building better outcomes for our people. Our people are not always in Aboriginal specific roles, some are in your standard roles, and that's fine, but most of our people really want to improve the publicity and exposure of our people, and seeing that we are successful, that despite our history, we are still fighting forwards, and that we want everyone to embrace our culture as well. So wherever you are from across the world, we openly, and I would say, because I don't talk for every Aboriginal person, but because I have a mixed history as well, mixed heritage, I know that whenever I teach my culture, it's something very sacred, and it's something that is very important to pass on to someone else. Because you are here on traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people, and all I would say is acknowledging that Australia has a black history, and that our people are very diverse, and if you ever wish to continue on learning about our culture, because our people have been in Australia for a very, very long time, and have a lot of knowledge that would be useful. And so I put this slide up, and it's not in your attachments if anyone has them, because I thought what I forgot to do was give you some references to have a look at, should you want to do a bit of reading yourself later on. Because I've only got a short period of time, so if and just use Google, of course, or any other search engine that you like, but Reconciliation Australia, NAIDOC, IATSIS, if you type that in, you'll come up with some really good web resources to have a look at, which will go through far more information than I have, of course, and will give you some insight into our culture, and you'll see the diversity of that. First Australians documentary by Rachel Perkins. Now that is a short documentary, a bit of a narrative that does come in hardcover and DVD form, but you can also watch episodes on the web as well. And that gives you a narrative, a documentary from the time that before the first fleet, when the first fleet arrived, and the impact that it's had till then. It's a really good resource to have a look at, as an entry or as a starting point to learn about our culture. And we have organisations in Melbourne and all over Australia that are self-determined. So they're Aboriginal people determining the future for our community. So community services, educational services, the health service. So basically if you type them in, you'll see Aboriginal organisations. So these services are available for our people. Not everyone goes there. Some go to the services you see every day, and that's fine. But just if you wanted to actually see an Aboriginal organisation yourself, then type in those acronyms and they should come up. So that's all I wanted to share with you this afternoon. There is so much information to get across, but what's really important to me are your queries or any particular comments that you had, or if there's something you've always thought, that's not right, but I've never met an Aboriginal person, so I don't know how to ask, whatever that may be. Is it okay? Happy to take your questions now. And don't think to yourself, oh my gosh, that might sound so racist, because it's not. You only know what you know. And like I said, people are influenced by those three factors. So if you're saying it from the right place, if you're saying it because you want to learn, And that's fine. I'm not going to get offended. I do these all the time for university staff. And my role here is to help you understand the truth.